Okay, panel, we're going to get to some questions here. And the question will be put to the panel, and whoever wants to answer first can. And of course, the other panel member is free to weigh in also. So it comes down to this. All of these force majeure clauses are different. How will the court be able to construe and interpret them? Who would like to take that first?
Sure, I'll take that. As I said early on, each state will have some general contract interpretation rules, and a court is going to determine whether those clauses are ambiguous or unambiguous. And they'll use general contract principles. And if it's unambiguous, then they're going to apply and enforce the actual written contract and what not only the force majeure clause says, but in context with the rest of the lease. It'll be read strictly in context and using only the words used in the contract and rendering none of them superfluous. So everything, it will be assumed that every word has meaning and they're in there for a reason. Right down to commas and where commas are. So that's how unambiguous force majeure clauses will be interpreted. I suspect that ambiguous force majeure clauses may be determined by extrinsic type evidence, things outside the four corners of the contract or lease in particular. Perhaps testimony from the negotiating parties, perhaps other extraneous information that allow the judge to see the clause in terms of context. So that's how we believe courts are going to interpret the contracts.
Any other ideas on that, or should we go on to another question? I have a question here. I have another question here. We've seen moves, no foreclosures, that's for owners, of course, but no evictions. What happens if an individual is unable to pay, they've lost their job, they owe the landlord money? What happens then? Does it build up like an account that still has to be repaid? What's the story with that? Let's say it's a small landlord, just owns a unit off the back of his house. How does that work out?
So residential leases are dealt with a little bit differently than commercial leases. If you're dealing with a landlord-tenant situation, there's moratoriums across the United States now preventing evictions. However, it's not expected that those residential tenants will be permitted to abate rent during the length of the moratorium. So it would be assumed, unless there's a provision contrary in the lease, that the rent is accruing and it will be owed. However, that doesn't prevent the parties from negotiating a settlement or some other workaround that would permit the landlord to pay his obligations on a mortgage to the bank while also accounting for the fact that his tenant may have been out of work and unable to pay rent. This is going to cause probably a huge backlog in evictions in foreclosure court, and it might be something akin to what we saw in 2008, but that remains to be seen at this point.
Fair enough. Just a question I'm sure that many people have pondered what's going to happen with this as we move ahead. Now let's go back to another question here. Is foreseeability a fact question?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this. Yes, it generally is. And the things we laid out today, like the fact of the playbook, one administration left another, that indicated pandemic is a real possibility. The fact that there have been over the past century various diseases and pandemics. All of those things will come into play on whether or not a certain provision or event was foreseeable and therefore should have been included in a lease or a contract. Yeah, those are typically fact questions.
Any other thoughts on that? I'll go on to another question. Have any of these cases been fully determined or adjudicated in court yet in regard to the most recent pandemic?
We haven't seen one go all the way to the end and be disposed of and then through trial. other than the Bobby Flay case, I mean, that is essentially ended because the judge entered a preliminary or summary judgment against the tenant. So, you know, but that is, it's a pretty factually specific case. But that's really the only one that's wound its way through a state court at this point.
Yep, I would agree.
All right, let's do at least one more. How do you see the future of tenancy contracts in a post-COVID landscape?
I'll take a quick stab at this. I would hope to see that drafters are more cognizant of the risk allocation, the benefits of it, and that they contemplate these types of events, not only pandemics, but other things that might affect a tenant's particular market industry or geographic location, and really provide for some certainty in the face of an uncertain or, you know, not guaranteed to occur event. It is like insurance, and if you're not thinking about these types of provisions, you really should be.
All right, let's do one more. Are there any significant federal legislative developments in this? Are there any updates on the horizon that you can share with us?
We haven't seen any. I'm a member of the task force that is tasked with analyzing, you know, the latest White House transition, new policies. And we haven't seen any in particular pertaining to force majeure, landlord-tenant, especially in connection with commercial leases. So, but as those things develop, we do push those out to the public and to our clients through our Taft Law website.
One more quick question. I'm just curious because we're talking about commercial leases here. With so many people working from home, do you foresee a lot more supply of space being on the market and that affecting these kind of force majeure clauses?
That is certainly a possibility. Definitely in the short run, there's going to be a lot of inventory of commercial space. And the question is, how long will that last? When will people want to return? I can tell you there's been a lot of writing and publishing about law firms in particular, whether and when they will return. And I saw one of the latest publications last week indicated that the majority of law firms, especially large law firms, don't intend to return to their offices until sometime in 2022. And that it's actually a bit of an issue of competition for young talent who do not want to operate out of an office setting. So all of those things, I think it's industry specific though as well. All of those things are going to be factors. And I think in the short run, certainly there's going to be less occupation of office space. The question is whether in the long run that will return to the levels we've seen back in 2019.